The Seattle Seahawks are coming to New York for a game against the Jets. The Seahawks are in the middle of the playoff race. This is a big game for them. For the Jets, well, not so much. It's Locked On Jets, Locked On Seahawks crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Happy Thanksgiving. And in addition to Thanksgiving, it is crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Jets, Locked On Seahawks, a crossover episode ahead of Sunday's game. I'm John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, alongside Rob Brang, the co-host of Locked On Seahawks. Today's crossover Thursday is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, Rob, great to be with you today. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, sir, and to all of our listeners. Thank you so much.
Well, Rob, a big game ahead for the Seattle Seahawks this weekend. Not quite as big for the New York Jets. The Jets are very much in the role of spoiler, whereas the Seahawks are right in the middle of the NFC West race, where it seems like all four teams actually have a shot to win that division entering this Thanksgiving weekend. What are the big stories around the Seattle team right now?
Well, I think the biggest one is the emergence of Jaxon Smith-Njigba as the number one receiver in the Seahawks attack. DK Metcalf, of course, has the biggest name recognition, and for good reason. He's an unbelievable talent, but JSN has emerged as the leading receiver in just about every metric, whether it be catches, receiving yards, touchdowns. He is absolutely on fire for Seattle right now. I think on the flip side of the ball, defensively, the Seattle's ability now to stop the run. For much of the season, they had been one of the worst teams in all of football when it came to run defense. And over the last couple of victories against the San Francisco 49ers, against the Arizona Cardinals the past 2 weeks, Seattle has been much stouter against the running, against opponents running. And that is what has them currently in first place by a tiebreaker, but in first place in the NFC West.
Well, JSN is a receiver Jets fans know well, because last year heading into the draft, he was a guy a lot of fans had their eye on, and a bit of a loaded topic in the Jets fan base, because the Jets made a surprising pick, Will McDonald, who's having a pretty good season for the team. When did JSN's emergence begin?
Well, there was flashes even as a rookie, but the last month or so, he is when his game has taken off. He is now, it seems like, getting double-digit opportunities every single game. Seattle is moving him around much more, where he is clearly the focal point of Geno Smith from the beginning of the play until the end. There has been some real development in JSN's game in terms of just his savvy as a route runner after the initial play breaks down. That's where he's finding those holes in the zone. He is really using the lateral agility that made him such a standout throughout the workout process. And then he has always shown a knack for playing very big in the biggest of games and when the spotlight is the brightest. And so that's certainly something that Seattle is going to be hoping to accomplish here. I think that anybody who follows this closely knows the Jets have a very, very talented secondary, but also one that I think is going to be challenged a little bit by the receivers and the quarterback that the Seahawks bring to the table.
Well, let's talk about that quarterback a little bit, because the quarterback's a very familiar name to Jets fans, Geno Smith, who was a Jets second-round pick back in 2013 and has kind of revitalized his career in Seattle. You know, things did not go well in New York. He was not put into a great circumstance and kind of bounced around the league. And in the last couple of years has developed into a quality starting quarterback. What else can you tell us about our old friend Geno?
Well, the biggest thing is that he's always been a talented passer. That's why the Jets made him a second-round pick all those years ago, as you mentioned. But the leadership, I think, has changed. I think that he has seen some stuff, frankly, from the sidelines of being the backup in so many different stops along his NFL journey. Finally got the opportunity, of course, a couple of years ago with the big trade of Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, and really has taken it and run with it. The accuracy has really been, to me, one of his his standouts. Right now, he's actually tied for the NFL lead with interceptions. So you would think that he is having a terrible season. In fact, he is averaging or completing, almost 70% of his passes. He really does show pinpoint accuracy at times. He makes some mistakes. There's no question about it. He can get a little bit too aggressive. And frankly, that was one of the things that I saw early in his career with the Jets. But at the same time, you don't want to take away the game maker, from him. You don't want to harness him too much because that's exactly what makes him special as well.
Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. You alluded to Seattle's improving run defense. What are some of the other things you can tell us about the Seahawks on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, certainly the trade for Ernest Jones, the fourth, it was huge, and so that put a legitimate playmaker in the middle of Mike McDonald's defense, and then the ascension of the rookie Tyrese Knight. He was a fourth round pick, and Seattle previously had Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, a couple of former AFC East players that Jets fans I'm sure are very familiar with. Those were the starters heading into the season. Seattle was just atrocious again in run defense. I mean, allowed 225 rushing yards to a San Francisco team that didn't even have Christian McCaffrey on the field at the time. So again, that has been the biggest transition is the trade for Ernest Jones, and then the ascent of Tyrese Knight after Tyrell Dodson was released. That has completely changed things around. Seattle also made a trade for Roy Robertson Harris. He's a big defensive lineman, 6'5", 300-pounder that has added a degree of just toughness and nastiness to the defensive line that Seattle was lacking. And it's kind of funny because the Seahawks are actually in some ways mirror images of the New York Jets, and that they are very talented secondary, relatively anonymous to most NFL fans out there in terms of the linebacking, and then they have some big names along the defensive line that gets everybody excited. Just like your Quentin Williams, Seattle, of course, has maybe Leonard Williams or Byron Murphy II, who of course was their first round selection this year. Seattle has some big names along the defensive line that are starting to turn out some big numbers as well.
Leonard Williams, that's a name familiar to Jets fans as well. It's amazing how many guys end up would go from that Jets to Seattle pipeline. Sure is a long list of names, including Pete Carroll. Early in his career, he was a Jets head coach, and he ended up with Seattle. But of course, the Seahawks' new first-year coaching staff. What are the early returns on them so far?
Well, it's been interesting. It's been very much an up and down season. They started off hot right out of the gate, and then went through basically a 5-game losing streak, So it really was some tough sledding there for a little while with Mike McDonald's defense, or Mike McDonald's squad. But after the bye, the team has come back and playing much better football, much better team defense. They've cut down on the number of turnovers and the silly mistakes. They are still very much struggling to run the football. So again, kind of a mirror image of the New York Jets here. And they too often are basically asking Geno Smith to play hero ball at the very end to kind of save them. But because the increased physicality of the defense, playing so much better, it feels like this is becoming a little bit more now Mike McDonald's team rather than Pete Carroll's leftovers. And so that to me is one of the big storylines here, is that it's fascinating. This is going to be one of their very last full country trips for the rest of the regular season, considering the fact that they just had these 2 victories against divisional opponent, and now it feels like this is a Jets team that frankly is struggling right now, 1-7 last 8 games, of course, that this feels like a game that the Seahawks should win. That said, we haven't seen enough consistency from this squad yet. Mike McDonald is a young enough head coach. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. Are the Seahawks going to stay focused, with being the holiday week and all of those kinds of things? So that to me is what makes this game fascinating, one to evaluate. And I think it's a very much a turning point in the Mike McDonald's first season in Seattle. This could be where the Seahawks, so to speak, are the ones on liftoff, or it could be where they absolutely have to turn around at the gate and wait and allow the rest of the teams in the NFC West to pass them by.
Rob, I think this game's kind of a wild card for the Jets as well. The Jets are coming out of their bye week after an ugly loss to the Indianapolis Colts, which followed another ugly loss to the Arizona Cardinals. Sorry, Seahawks fans, the Jets did not deliver for you a couple weeks back in Arizona. But here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks, we're going to flip the script. Oh, there's so much to talk about with the New York Jets. Rob's going to put me on the hot seat. I'll tell you all about what's going on with this team and what's been an eventful but disappointing season that's ahead here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks. Our episode of Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks today is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Our current line on FanDuel for this game, Seahawks are favored by 1.5 points at MetLife Stadium. Rob, that sounds awfully low to me based on the way the Jets are playing. We're going to get to the Jets in a minute. Look, I don't give advice on these, but if I did, I'd say that Seattle by 1.5 seems low. Line seems low. Well, FanDuel again is the place to get in on the action. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Just go to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm John Butchko of Locked On Jets alongside Rob Rang of Locked On Seahawks. Rob, where do you want to begin with the Jets? Obviously, eventful season, disappointing season in every way imaginable. The Jets have been a headline machine this season. They have regularly been the top story because of some crazy move that they've made. I don't even know where to begin. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think you have to start with the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. And I guess my question would be, are you seeing any signs that that he is going to become the leader that is going to be able to turn the Jets around at this point? I think that, when you have a coaching change early in the season like the Jets did, it feels like it's incumbent for the veteran players to really kind of seize this opportunity. Aaron Rodgers, of course, is, he's a future Hall of Famer, and we all know his talent. I can appreciate the 17-7 touchdown interception ratio. All that looks great on paper. Is he playing with the fire that is actually going to inspire his teammates to play against a team that, as we talked about in the Seattle Seahawks, that are very motivated at this point?
Rob, I think the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I think by all accounts, Rodgers, and look, we don't know. Sometimes things are happening behind the scenes that come out later. We'll know more after the season. I have no reason to doubt that Aaron Rodgers has been anything but an exemplary guy in the locker room. I mean, look, he does tend to go off script a little bit with some of his comments to the media. The McAfee show is always an adventure, every Tuesday. I don't think there's any issue with his leadership, but I think if you've watched him through the season, you see somebody who very much looks like a 40-year-old quarterback, a guy who just cannot play at the level he used to in Green Bay. And I think through the course of the season, there's been a deterioration in his play. The first couple weeks of the year, he wasn't great. He wasn't vintage Aaron Rodgers, but he was plenty good enough. He was a quality starting quarterback. And as the season progressed, his play, I think, has gone down in quality. And he's kind of hinted at it with some of the stuff he's told announcers in the production meetings, because every week you'll hear whoever the analyst is for the game mention this, but he's 40 years old and the body doesn't recover from injuries the way it used to. And when you watch him play, he's hesitant to stand in the pocket now and take hits. And I think it's because, he's been on the injury report pretty much since week 4. Dealt with an ankle injury, dealt with a hamstring, dealt with a knee. And Jets offensive line's actually not been bad this year, which is the first time I can say that in about a decade. Jets offensive line's actually been pretty decent in pass protection, but he doesn't stand in the pocket anymore. He's looking to get the ball out as quickly as possible. He's just looking to dump it off. He used to be one of the most frequent deep throwers in the league. He barely throws deep at this point. And it limits what the Jets can do. It limits the downfield passing game. Now, as you mentioned, the touchdown to interception ratio looks good. He's not putting the ball in danger all that much. He's avoiding the big mistakes, but he's also not making big plays. And that really limits what the Jets can do on the offensive side of the ball. And look, I mean, you could be the greatest leader in the world. You could be, Ray Lewis in his prime. I think this Jets situation is so chaotic that I'm not sure any player could help lead this team through such a crazy year that the Jets have had. Much of it's been because the owner is a very impulsive guy who, makes moves that I don't think he entirely thinks through the implications of.
Well, and then that kind of leads me to my next question. Obviously one of those moves that the Jets made there is the big trade for Devontae Adams to reunite him with Aaron Rodgers. Here, I almost said Brett Favre. I think that type of decision making is fascinating. I think it's one of the reasons that it could be exciting to be a Jets fan. Is because you feel like you have an owner who is so bought in that they are willing to do just about anything. But to your point, I don't. That I often say in our show with Corbin that the proof is in the pudding, and there hasn't been much pudding so far. Between Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams when it comes to production for the Jets. And so, are you seeing some signs from that? How encouraged would you be with obviously the Jets coming off of the bye week here in preparation for this game? But are you expecting that Devontae Adams breakout? And well, I do think that Seattle secondary is like the Jets is very, very talented, especially at the cornerback position. Do you think that breakout from Devontae Adams could be coming this week against the Seahawks?
He is coming off a strong game against the Indianapolis Colts. It may have been his best game in the Jets uniform. He also played very well Halloween night on Thursday Night Football against Houston. But, he's 31 years old. He's going to turn 32 on Christmas Eve. He still can be a productive receiver. He still can help a team. I think the days of Devontae Adams being a first-team All-Pro are probably over. I think there have been a number of games where he's been a non-factor. The timing of the trade was really odd because the Jets were 2-4 at that point. And I look, this is not a second guess. This is what I said at the time the trade was made. That is very difficult to envision how that deal turned the Jets from a 2-4 team into a Super Bowl team. I think that I've been a little disappointed because there have been a lot of moments where they haven't been on the same page, which is surprising because one of the biggest arguments for the trade was that Rodgers was having trouble developing chemistry with receivers like Mike Williams. And you thought this is the guy he had so much chemistry with in Green Bay. And you see it like at least 2 times every game, I think, where Adams isn't looking for the ball. Rodgers gives him a hand signal. He thinks he's turning a run play into a pass play, and Adams is blocking down the field, or Adams isn't running a route the way. It's actually been kind of surprising how frequently they have not been on the same page. It's like I said, I think Adams can help the Jets. I think he had a good game 2 weeks ago against the Colts, heading into their bye, but I think his best days are behind him. He's at the stage of his career where he's at the not what he used to be, but still productive stage of his career. But unfortunately, the Jets kind of need him to be what he used to be. And even going beyond that, the stuff I mentioned with Rodgers, where Rodgers' unwillingness or inability or whatever it is to stand in the pocket and throw the ball down the field is an issue. And one thing I'll add to this is the few moments where Rodgers does stand in the pocket is when the other team rushes 3 guys. That's actually like one of the if you look at the instances where Rodgers is hung tough in the pocket. There was a touchdown against Minnesota. There have been a couple big plays in the season, and that's when he knows he won't get hit. So I advise the Seahawks don't rush 3 against Rodgers. But other than that, I think that kind of limits what Adams is capable of doing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I assure you, Mike McDonald is not only going to rush 3 very often. At least that's not been his MO to this point. But rather than just kind of harp about some of the players that are aging for the Jets, I also wanted to ask you about a player I believe is going to be an ascending talent for them, and that is the offensive tackle Olu Fashanu, who of course now is going to be pushed into a starting role, presumably at left tackle, with Tyron Smith now being placed on IR. I remember Fashanu just being this, precocious young player at Penn State, had all the talent in the world. He reminds me a little bit of Seattle's Charles Cross. To me, he's not the most physical player, but my goodness, is he graceful, is athletic for his size. What have you seen so far from him? I know that he's played different positions along the offensive line so far for the Jets. And, again, what are your expectations for him if indeed he is going to be Aaron Rodgers' blindside protector over the second half of the season?
You're right. He has played different positions. He began the year as the swing tackle. Week 3 against the Patriots, Morgan Moses left with an injury, so he got a couple starts at right tackle. Then the Jets had some injuries at guard. They had some ineffective play from their backups at guard, so he played a little guard. And now if we're not going to harp on older players who aren't performing, I should not mention the guy he's replacing, Tyron Smith. But he did step into the lineup. Most rookie tackles struggle. And I think Fashanu's, it's been no exception. There have been moments of real struggle. And I think part of it's, you mentioned it, he's not the most physical guy in the world. I think that, he's still kind of getting into the weight program. I think physically, maybe he's not exactly where the Jets want him to be. So I try to grade him on a curve, because how many tackles step in and are really good year one? Even guys who end up being really good players, there are growing pains. And there have been growing pains for Olu-Fashanu, but there were moments against the Colts where, you saw him hold up and you say, you know what, if he can channel that, there were stretches again in that game where he played good football. And, like I said, I'm grading on a curve, but I'm looking for encouraging moments. I'm not looking for him to play clean games, because I think that's a lot to ask right now, especially given the circumstances the Jets are in, especially given Rodgers being a quarterback who has reduced mobility and, maybe can't, move as well as he used to and evade the pass rush. But, the early returns, they haven't been spectacular, but I think there are things you can build on. And, he's, as you said, he's very graceful, got great movement skills. I think that the ceiling is very high for him. And I think that he can be, if things go right, he can be the type of guy who solidifies that position for 8 to 10 years.
And it's good to know, because, again, I think that he is a player who has a great deal of talent to him. One question real quick on defense. I know we're kind of up against the clock a little bit here, but I'm excited to see the Jets secondary against Seattle's wide receivers and Geno Smith. I think that he's, he says that this is just another game, but how can it possibly be? And so, whether it be Sauce Gardner versus DK Metcalf, the Michael Carter, I think is a good player. But we talked about before that pipeline, it goes from west to east as well. And DJ Reed, can you just tell me about how he's been playing here, that the former Seahawk playing for the Jets? And, this is a team I think that's given up 8 touchdowns so far. Only has 2 interceptions, so that's interesting as well. But still, do you feel like this is one of the key matchups in this football game?
Yeah, DJ Reed, I've called him on Locked On Jets the Jets' best free agent signing of the 21st century. And granted, the competition, if you think about the Jets' free agent signings of the 21st century, the competition isn't all that stuff. But he's been phenomenal. The Jets got him a very fair contract a couple of years back, and he's played at the level of a number 1 corner for most of his time with the team. And I think this has been his best season. And Sauce Gardner is not having the type of season we're accustomed to with Sauce Gardner. So Reed, in some ways, has kind of become the team's number 1 corner. And, as you and your listeners know, he's a little undersized, but he just makes up for it because he's got such great movement skills. He's so sticky in coverage. He's got ball skills, outstanding corner. And, on paper, this is, I think, the best corner trio in the league between, you mentioned Michael Carter II, who just got a new contract from the team, a top-notch slot corner, and Sauce Gardner, who it's having a disappointing season. I'm hoping he bounces back next year, because he's been, his first 2 years, he was a first team All-Pro. He was as good of a corner as there was in the NFL. So yeah, this is a very talented, it's a talented corner group. The safeties are not quite as good. And there's been some drama because there's been some questions. Did the owner bench one of their starting safeties 2 weeks ago in Tony Adams? And the head coach, Jeff Ulbrich, did not deny it, which, if it wasn't true, you'd think that'd be the easiest thing to laugh at and say that's ridiculous. But this is an excellent group of corners. When they play at their best, I mean, they're really tough to get open on. And, the Jets also on paper have good defensive line. It has not performed up to expectations this year. But Quinnen Williams has started to come on in recent weeks. So this is a defense that, has not always played up to its talent level, but there is talent there. So you've heard all about the Seahawks. You've heard all about the Jets ahead here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks. We're going to get to our keys to victory. What do the Seahawks need to do to win? What do the Jets need to do to win? Stay tuned. Rob and I will discuss that moving forward here on Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks. This crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Seahawks is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to get last-minute tickets, and Game Time now has a feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Rob, you may not be experienced with December at MetLife when the Jets are out of the playoff race. Plenty of tickets available, and Game Time's the place to find the best deals on them. In fact, I might be going to this game. My dad asked me if I wanted to go to this game Sunday. We can bet if we go, we're going to be checking out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Locked On NFL. It's one word with no space for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Well, it's game time. Crossover Thursday here on this Thanksgiving. John Butchko, Locked On Jets, along with Rob Rang, Locked On Seahawks, getting ready for Sunday's game between the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks. These teams have a really interesting history. Lots of fairly memorable games these teams have played. I remember back in '97, Bill Parcells' first game as Jets head coach was a game in the Kingdom where the Jets, they were coming off a 1-15 season, and the Jets went up there and beat the Seahawks 41-3. The next year game, I won't mention for you guys know what happened in '98 with Vinny Testaverde at the Meadowlands.
Yep.
I think it was in December too, so we won't mention that. But 10 years later, 2008, Brett Favre goes to Seattle, a snowy day, and Mike Holmgren's last home game as Seahawks last game as Seahawks head coach. The Seahawks beat the Jets and contribute to the demise of the Favre Jets. Some really interesting games these teams have played through the years, Rob. Sunday, the 2024 version of Jets and Seahawks. What are the keys to victory for Seattle?
Well, first off, it's just I love that you mentioned those games. One of the very first games I remember attending as a fan, as a kid, was the game that you mentioned before. Bill Parcells, his first season, coming out for the 1-15 season. There was an awful lot of expectations in Seattle in that opener, and I remember bringing my best buddy Geno up there to the game with me, and watching the Seahawks get absolutely throttled, as you said, I think 41-3, and just that was about as big of a disappointment as I've ever seen in an opener. And so that was a fascinating game. And then I was fortunate at that point, a accredited member of the media, and was down on the field for Brett Favre's final game, and the snow coming down, and literally there were snowballs being thrown at Brett Favre, at the late Seattle owner Paul Allen, and batting snowballs away so that the athletes and the owner at that point were getting pelted with snowballs. I mean, there's just some memorable experiences. So I love that you just mentioned that. As far as Sunday's game, as I mentioned before, I really think that these are two teams that are so similar in so many different ways. It just feels like that one team is really starting to hit on all cylinders, and the other team is kind of flatline at this point. And so that is, I'm fascinated to see if the Jets coming off of their bye are able to regroup a little bit and get a little bit more timing between Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, or Garrett Wilson, wherever the case might be. The team that runs the ball effectively, I think, and I know that's as cliche as it gets, but I think it's really true in this particular football game, because you are going against two pretty stout defenses, two somewhat enigmatic quarterbacks. And so I think that, again, the team that is able to run the ball a little bit more effectively, I think it's fascinating because Breece Hall was the only running back that was selected ahead of Kenneth Walker III a couple of years ago, and they both have shown their big play ability. Neither have had the numerical statistical success so far this season that I think people who drafted him in the first round of their fantasy football draft, for example, might have been expecting, or maybe second round. But the point is that I really do think that's going to be one of the biggest keys to this football game. Obviously, whoever controls the clock, whoever limits turnovers, but I think that the team that runs for the most yards in this game winds up winning the football game.
Rob, I think in many ways it's going to come down, and not so much who wins, but just whether this is competitive, is what Jets team shows up for this one, because as you mentioned, they are coming off their bye, and the last couple of weeks, it's kind of felt like the Jets have come out really, really flat, and that's been one of the stories of the season. If they were like in the game late in the second quarter, they really started to focus and key in, and they, even though they lost to the Colts, they turned it into a game. Thursday Night Football, Halloween night against the Houston Texans, they played a really bad first half, but they were still in it. Quinnen Williams made some big plays to hold Houston down in that one, and they fought back and won. And then game a couple weeks ago against Arizona, the Jets just came out flat, and the Cardinals steamrolled them. The Cardinals scored touchdown after touchdown after touchdown, and you just kind of saw the Jets lose their fight. And I'm always like hesitant to question like efforts when we're talking about professional athletes, but there were moments in that game against Arizona where you saw, it's not, I don't know if guys weren't trying, but you saw like a Jets defender trying to make a tackle, and the second and third guys are just kind of standing around instead of rallying to the football and going after them. It's just like little things like that you see. And this Jets team is now out of the playoff race. If you've been watching Jets games over the last month, you've always heard the announcer say, well, we spoke with Aaron Rodgers, and he thinks the schedule is softening up, and this is going to be the game that turns it around. And I think the illusion that the Jets were going to be able to turn it around finally ended 2 weeks ago against the Indianapolis Colts. At 3-8, I think there's really no coming back from this. So the question is, how much passion will we see the Jets play with? Will we see the team that fought to victory against Houston? Will we see the team that, didn't show a lot of fight against Arizona? I think that's the question. That's the question of whether it's going to be a close game. I don't think the Jets are going to blow the Seahawks out. I think that there are 3 possible outcomes in this game. I think that the Seahawks could blow the Jets out if the Jets don't take, if the Jets come out flat, or it could be a close game that goes either way. And part of it will be, how does the team respond to everything that's happened? Apparently, there was an owner-mandated practice during the bye week that the head coach was going to give them off, and the owner said, no, you're practicing. I don't know that that's going to have a good impact. I may have no impact. I don't know that it's going to have a good impact on morale, but it's kind of where we're at in this Jets season. I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say it's a season that began with Super Bowl hopes, but when those things fall apart, you never know how it's going to impact the team.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that feels like Seattle was basically experiencing that a couple of weeks ago. And then they had their bye week. They were able to get healthy. And that's one of the things that it feels like that this is a team that's getting even healthier. I mean, Uchenna Nwosu is not going to be back on the field in this particular game, but he in the past had been one of Seattle's best pass rushers, certainly its toughest, most physical run defender at the outside linebacker position. And he is expected to be coming back after this week or maybe 2 weeks from now, but still his injury opening was basically set up this past week. So I guess one of the questions I have is, to me, as we talked about, this feels like a team, that the Jets squad, that if they do play, if they focused, if they are ready to play, if they're not flat, then I need to think that this game could be close. To me, the Jets have some defensive playmakers. We talked a little bit about Quinton Williams. Obviously, his brother Quincy Williams is a terrific football player as well. I wanted to ask you about Will Montgomery and the possibility, Will McDowell, and the possibility of his pass rush ability. Seattle has some moving parts along the offensive line. Abraham Lucas is coming back from an injury, and then at the guard position specifically, Christian Haynes was drafted this year. He's a rookie, and then Satoa Leomea is a rookie as well. Those two players may be playing significant minutes. They're both in the idea, or both in the plans to be rotating at the right guard position. Quinton Williams doesn't usually line up against them. He's more often going up against the left guard, who would be another Jets former player, and Laken Tomlinson. So some of the struggles there. Do the Jets have enough firepower on defense, essentially, to be able to turn what could be a close game into one where the Jets are able to kind of steal a victory, as they did against the Houston Texans?
Yeah, in that game, Quinton Williams played a huge role. I mean, Texas had some chance to blow that game open in the first half, and every time Quinton Williams made a big play, he had a strip sack on C.J. Stroud, a couple other big tackles for loss, and Will McDonald was the first round pick a year ago. Having a big season statistically, I think if you've been watching the games, he hasn't been quite as good as the numbers would suggest. A number of his sacks have come on plays where he was unblocked, but he's developed a really nice spin move. He's not much of a run defender at this point, really struggles to hold up. Doesn't really set the edge all that well, but can get to the quarterback. And, this defensive line, if it performs up to standards, can keep the Jets in the game. I've kind of given up hope on Hassan Reddick, but that's another story. But Quinton Williams and Will McDonald, they're a nice 1-2 punch when we talk about the pass rush. So anyway, Rob, great being with you today. Hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving.
I will, and to you as well. Thank you so much for having me, John.
And all you listeners out there, Locked On Jets, Locked On Seahawks, if you're traveling today, please travel safe. Have a great time with your family and friends. You can join me tomorrow on Locked On Jets. We'll continue talking Jets Seahawks. Join Rob on Locked On Seahawks as well. Can't wait for this game this Sunday between the Jets and the Seahawks. We'll chat with you tomorrow.